I think it's fair that we don't know for certain which country was behind this attack, but we do know that it's a sophisticated state-based actor, and that means there's a high probability that it's China, because we've heard from the ABC, for example, that government officials have briefed journalists on background that it was actually China behind this attack, and China does have a pattern of carrying out these kinds of activities around the world. So I think the opinions of some of my colleagues and myself on this matter are just based on precedent and what we know about Chinese cyber activity.
So why has Scott Morrison come up with these claims now, and what's new about them?
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting to see sort of such a big statement about these activities, even though it's not tied to a specific incident. And I think that's really a reflection of the scale of activity that Australia is facing. The fact that these activities, these cyber attacks, aren't just going after government institutions, but going after academic institutions, businesses as well in Australia. And I think it must have been an extremely alarming level of activity for the government to come out and make this statement.
Well, there is speculation that the cyber attacks on the Australian government could be in retaliation for banning Huawei from the 5G network here. What are your thoughts on that?
Cyber attacks are something that the Chinese government has been linked to around the world. So I think it's something that they're engaged in probably at a daily level and against many countries. Those might change with China's strategic position and its interests in different countries, but we're far from alone in facing this challenge.
Well, you've written about the Chinese Communist Party strengthening its influence through something called the United Front system. What is that, and why should it concern Australia?
The United Front system is a grouping of agencies and front groups and people, mostly in China, but also around the world, who are working to build the Chinese Communist Party's influence and bring more people into alignment with its goals. It's extremely concerning in Australia because it's been linked to suspected cases of political influence or political interference even, which is covert influence. And this means that these activities are undermining decision-making and independence and sovereignty in our country.
Can you give us some specific examples of its networks overseas and how it operates?
Well, one of the best-known examples comes from Australia, because we're really a hotspot of these activities, and that's the case of Huang Xiangmo, a Chinese Communist Party-linked businessman who was expelled from Australia late in 2018. And allegedly, according to reports at the time, this was done by the Australian government on the basis of their conclusion that he was amenable to conducting acts of foreign interference. He famously donated millions of dollars to both sides of politics and built quite a close relationship with Senator Sam Dastyari, tried to, for example, change the Labor Party's policy on the South China Sea. And these activities seem to go back to this United Front system. He was running what looks like a front group for that.
So how extensive and significant is the group's influence here in Australia, and what damage could it be causing?
Thankfully, the decision to cancel Huang Xiangmo's Australian residency has forced him out of the country. So a lot of these United Front networks that are carrying out influence work on behalf of the Chinese government have shrunk back a little bit and gone a little bit quiet. But I think these activities are still ongoing. They're going to get harder to track. And as we've heard from this latest announcement from Scott Morrison, I think just like the level of cyber activity that we're facing from China, the level of sort of on-the-ground political influence work is likely to just increase.
So, Alex, what's being done and what more can be done to counter this influence?
So far, the Australian government has enacted counter-foreign interference laws that now criminalise carrying out covert influence work on behalf of a foreign government. But we haven't seen those laws actually used in a court case yet. So an important step will be prosecuting these agents of interference. But I think something that hasn't been emphasised quite enough is the need for a civil society and a media response, because it originally wasn't the Australian government that really shone a light on a lot of these activities. It was the work of investigative journalists in Australia. And likewise, I think it's it's going to be crucially important to make sure that Chinese language media in Australia is protected from interference, that it's independent, that it's resourced to serve Australian Chinese communities, and that people in those communities feel free to voice their opinions and aren't being smothered by voices linked to the Chinese Communist Party.
Alex Joske, good to talk. Thank you.
Thank you.